History is full of hidden gems, stories that are just as incredible as the ones everyone knows, but somehow never made the spotlight. From court cases that quietly reshaped society to bizarre political assassinations, and even the moment a nurse's actions nearly triggered a war, these are the events that slipped through the cracks. Today we're taking a look at some historical moments that might have slipped under the radar but won't be forgotten anytime soon. Here we made 20 and a list of historical events probably you didn't know about. 20. The Defenestration of Prague. The term defenestration may sound oddly specific, but it literally means throwing someone out of a window with deadly intent. In 1618, this dramatic act sparked a conflict that would rage for decades. Known as the Defenestration of Prague, this event unfolded at Prague Castle when Protestant nobles, frustrated by Catholic officials, decided to throw two of them out of a window. Miraculously, the two men survived after landing in a pile of manure, thwarting the Protestants' immediate plan. However, the event set off a much larger chain reaction, leading directly to the outbreak of the 30 Years' War, a brutal conflict that would reshape Europe. 19. Henrietta Wood's fight for justice. Henrietta Wood was born into slavery around 1818, and unfortunately her fight for freedom didn't end when she escaped to Ohio, a free state, in 1844. After being illegally kidnapped by slave hunter Zebulon Ward in 1853, she was forced back into slavery until the Emancipation Proclamation finally freed her. Determined to seek justice, Wood filed a lawsuit against Ward in 1869 for lost wages and damages. In a historic ruling, she was awarded $2,500, a significant amount at the time, equivalent to roughly $50,000 to $60,000 today. Her win marked a critical, though rare, step towards accountability for the horrors of slavery. 18. A tragic vaccine error. In the 50s, after Jonas Salk developed the first effective polio vaccine, the US government quickly began mass production to protect children nationwide. However, Cutter Laboratories in Berkeley, California, accidentally produced around 120,000 doses that contained the live polio virus. The consequences were devastating. 55 children died, 113 were paralyzed, and 40,000 contracted a milder form of polio. Of those, 56 children developed severe cases that impacted their central nervous system. Following what became known as the Cutter incident, parents were understandably hesitant about vaccinating their children, although still do. That was in the 50s. 17. Aimo Koivunen's meth-fueled survival run in World War II. In March 1944, Finnish soldier Aimo Koivunen found himself separated from his squad while fleeing a Soviet attack near the Arctic Circle. Exhausted and freezing, he turned to the Pervitin pills in his pocket, methamphetamine provided by the Finnish army to boost energy in desperate situations. But in his panic, he didn't just take one dose. He swallowed all 30 tablets meant for his entire unit. What followed was an incredible nearly 3-week ordeal during which Koivunen skied non-stop through the Arctic wilderness, surviving without food or shelter. When he finally reappeared in Finnish territory, he had covered 250 kilometers, weighed just 94 pounds, and had his heart beating at over 200 beats a minute. 16. The assassination of Yornach. Yornach was a Swiss pastor turned politician who played a key role during the 30 Years' War. In 1639, after being knighted for his service to Switzerland, Yornach threw a lavish party in the city of Chur, which happened to coincide with a large carnival. Amid the celebrations, a group of mass carnival goers knocked on the door, including one man dressed as a bear. They were allowed to join the party, but things soon took a dark turn. The man in the bear costume suddenly produced an axe and brutally murdered Yornach in front of his horrified guests. While the attack is widely believed to be a revenge killing, the assassin's true identity was never confirmed. 15. Canada's residential school system. The horrors of Canada's residential school system have only recently gained wider attention. Beginning in 1894, the government forced indigenous children to attend these schools run by religious institutions with the goal of severing their ties to their culture and assimilating them into European Canadian society. The abuse was widespread, physical, emotional, and cultural. It's estimated that up to 30,000 children died from the neglect and mistreatment they suffered, a staggering 20% of all those enrolled. The trauma didn't stop with those who attended. It rippled through generations, leaving deep scars on indigenous communities with high rates of PTSD, alcoholism, and self-harm. 14. Howard Hughes helped the US recover a Soviet submarine. In 1968, a Soviet submarine armed with nuclear missiles disappeared in the Pacific Ocean, sparking a frantic search. Both the US and the Soviets were racing to find it. But after months of searching, the Soviets gave up. The Americans, though, weren't ready to quit. They managed to pinpoint the wreck using top-secret Air Force technology. But here's the tricky part. How do you raise a Soviet submarine without them finding out? That's where billionaire Howard Hughes came in. He agreed to help by pretending to be running a deep-sea mining operation. It worked like a charm, and the US was able to recover parts of the sub without the Soviets ever suspecting a thing. 13. Move bombing. In 1985, a long-standing conflict between the Philadelphia police and MOVE, a black liberation and environmental activist group, came to a tragic head. On May 13th, police ordered members of MOVE to leave their fortified home in a West Philadelphia neighborhood. Inside were 7 adults and 6 children. When MOVE refused to leave, over 500 officers surrounded the house. After tear gas failed to force them out and a gunfight broke out, police made an unthinkable decision. They dropped a bomb from a helicopter onto the building. The bomb caused a fire that killed 11 people, including 5 children. As if that wasn't already bad enough, instead of putting out the blaze, the authorities let it burn. And it destroyed 61 nearby homes, leaving more than 250 people homeless. 12. The 1957-58 pandemic. In 1957, a dangerous new respiratory virus surfaced in East Asia, and before long it was spreading across the world. Health experts at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research quickly stepped in, arranging to bring samples of the virus to the US for testing. What they discovered was alarming. The H2N2 virus was unlike any flu Americans had seen before, leaving the entire population vulnerable. The pandemic lasted 2 years, claiming nearly 70,000 lives in the US and millions more worldwide. Although it's not as well remembered as other outbreaks, it serves as a powerful reminder of how quickly a virus can spread and how easily we can forget these kinds of tragedies. 11. The mysterious bacteria that helped civil war. Soldiers heal. During the Civil War, some wounded soldiers noticed something strange. Certain injuries started glowing with a bluish-green light. It might have seemed creepy at first, but what made it even more fascinating was that the soldiers with glowing wounds were healing faster and had fewer infections than others. Doctors were completely baffled and had no idea why this was happening, so they gave it the nickname Angel's Glow. It wasn't until 2001 that scientists finally figured out what was going on. The glow came from a bacteria called Photohabdus luminescens, which thrives in cool, damp environments like Civil War battlefields. Surprisingly, this bacteria actually produces natural antibiotics, which explains why the soldiers with glowing wounds healed more quickly. What seemed like a strange miracle turned out to be nature lending a helping hand. 10. The almost 14th state. Back in 1784, a chunk of land west of the Appalachian Mountains, ceded by North Carolina to help pay off war debts, was turned into a self-proclaimed state called Franklin or Frankland. The idea was to become the 14th state of the newly formed United States. Local leaders in Franklin even set up their own government, hoping to gain official statehood, but despite their efforts, Congress wasn't convinced. They fell just short of the votes needed for admission, and the dream of Franklin faded. Eventually, the land was absorbed back into North Carolina and later became part of Tennessee. 9. The U.S. national debt reached $0. And once, The US has carried debt almost since its founding, with the first official debt recorded at $75 million in 1790 after the Revolutionary War. But in 1835, under President Andrew Jackson, the unthinkable happened. The national debt was paid off completely, making the US debt-free for the only time in its history. Jackson, a staunch advocate for fiscal responsibility, aggressively reduced the debt through budget cuts and land sales. However, this didn't last long. Just a year later, the US was back in debt, and the figure has grown ever since. 8. The Free State of Van Zandt. After the Civil War, the residents of Van Zandt County in East Texas found themselves frustrated by federal occupation and martial law. Deciding they had had enough, they boldly declared independence from both Texas and the US, forming what they called the Free State of Van Zandt. Their attempt to secede didn't sit well with the government, and General Sheridan dispatched federal troops to quash the rebellion. But the Van Zandt army, having celebrated their independence with a bit too much enthusiasm and alcohol, didn't put up much of a fight. The rebellion ended with little resistance, and the so-called Free State was quickly absorbed back into the US. 7. The nurse who nearly sparked the Revolutionary War. In 1775, Sarah Tarrant, a strong-willed nurse from Salem, Massachusetts, came dangerously close to sparking the Revolutionary War before it officially began. British officer Alexander Leslie had arrived in Salem with his troops, hoping to seize artillery he believed was hidden by local rebels. But the townspeople weren't having it. Some young locals sabotaged Leslie's boat, while others, along with the Salem militia, blocked his path at a bridge, armed and ready for a standoff. Leslie, not wanting to provoke a full-blown conflict, eventually turned his troops back towards Boston to save face. As they left, Sarah Tarrant boldly cursed at the retreating soldiers. One furious redcoat aimed his musket at her, but luckily Leslie ordered him to hold fire, narrowly avoiding an early clash that could have ignited the war. 6. A vice president and chart-topping songwriter. Most vice presidents stick to politics, but Charles Gates Dawes had a hidden talent. He wrote a hit song. Before becoming Calvin Coolidge's VP in 1925, Dawes was a banker and diplomat, but he also loved music. Back in 1911, he composed a piece called Melody in a major for violin and orchestra. In 1951, Carl Sigmund added lyrics, creating the pop song It's All in the Game. Tommy Edwards' version of the song hit #1 on the charts in 1958, and it stayed there for 6 weeks and hasn't faded into obscurity. Over the years, artists like Nat King Cole, Cliff Richard, and Barry Manilow have all put their own spin on it. 5. America's first victim of homophobia. In 1647, while New York was still the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam, Harman Manders van den Bogaert, a well-known explorer and barber surgeon, was caught in a compromising position with a black slave. At the time, Dutch Calvinist law made sodomy punishable by death. After being arrested, van den Bogaert escaped from custody at Fort Orange, now Albany, with his girlfriend and fled to an Iroquois village. However, during a standoff, a longhouse was set on fire, and after a shootout, he was recaptured. In a tragic turn, van den Bogaert died during his second escape attempt, falling through the ice, a somber mark of one of America's first instances of persecution based on sexual orientation. The first US female pilot's fame was overshadowed by the Titanic. Harriet Quimby was a true pioneer, bold, talented, and determined to make her mark. She didn't just break into one field, she wrote 6 Hollywood screenplays modeled for a soft drink company and then took to the skies. In 1911, Quimby became the first American woman to earn a pilot's license, and just 1 year later, she made history again as the first woman to fly solo across the English Channel. But her moment of triumph was completely overshadowed by the sinking of the Titanic, which happened the day before. Instead of the celebration she deserved, her achievement was largely forgotten as the world's attention turned to the tragedy at sea. Senator Ted Kennedy and the Chappaquiddick tragedy. Depending on what year you were born, you might be very or completely unfamiliar with this historical event. In July 1969, Senator Ted Kennedy was involved in a tragic car accident on Chappaquiddick Island. After leaving a party late at night, Kennedy's car plunged off a bridge and into the water. While Kennedy escaped, 28-year-old Mary Jo Kopechny, who was in the car with him, was trapped and tragically drowned. Even worse, Kennedy didn't report the accident until hours later, causing outrage and controversy. The scandal cast a massive shadow over Kennedy's political career and raised serious questions about his actions that night. The Battle of Castle Iter. In May 1945, just before the end of World War II, one of the most unexpected battles took place at Castle Iter in Austria. The castle had been used by the Nazis to hold important French prisoners, like former prime ministers and generals. As the Nazis were falling apart, the SS guards abandoned the prisoners. Left unprotected, the prisoners ended up teaming up with some German soldiers who had switched sides, led by Major Joseph Gangl and an American tank crew under Captain Jack Lee. Despite the odds, the group fended off the SS assault, holding the castle long enough for US reinforcements to arrive and claim victory. A conflict sparked by an ear. Back in 1739, Britain and Spain were on bad terms, and Britain needed a reason to go to war. They found one in a strange event that happened 8 years earlier. In 1731, a British merchant captain named Robert Jenkins claimed his ship, Rebecca, was stopped by the Spanish Coast Guard. During the search, one of the Spanish officers cut off Jenkins's ear with a sword. At the time, no one in the British government seemed to care much. But when Britain was ready to go to war with Spain in 1739, Jenkins's severed ear became the excuse they needed. The conflict that followed became known as the War of Jenkins's Ear, a war quite literally over an ear. And that's a wrap for today. If you found these hidden historical events fascinating, you'll definitely want to check out our list of 25 horrible historical events that'll terrify you. From devastating corporate greed that claimed countless lives to the tragic toll of genocides and wars, I dive into the darker moments that shaped the world we live in. Ready for more? Click on the link and get ready for a deep dive into some of history's most horrifying moments. And let me know in the comments any other, maybe not so well-known historical moments. See you guys next time.